On Father's Day. My own son sent me a box that made my wife gasp and whisper, "Don't open it, can't you see?" Her voice shook like she'd seen the devil himself. The air outside was heavy sirens echoing down the block, and I felt something inside me crack, not fear but realization. My boy, the same one I raised in the church pew every Sunday, had turned my faith into a test I never saw coming. I stood there, hand trembling over the box, knowing this wasn't just a gift, it was a warning. Subscribe and tell me in the comments what you'd do if it were your child. The morning after that cursed Father's Day, the smell of burnt coffee lingered in the kitchen, and I couldn't tell if it was the machine or my nerves breaking down. Evelyn sat across from me, her eyes swollen from a night of no sleep. The box was gone now, locked away in the back shed until the police finished their work, but its shadow still sat between us. I stared at the empty chair where my son used to eat pancakes every Sunday morning before church, back when he still called me Pop. Now he barely called at all unless it had to do with money. It started months before the box. The calls always came late, around the same time the neighborhood quieted down and the streetlights buzzed outside my window. Pop, he'd start, his voice all sugar and guilt. "You know I've been working hard. We just need a little help getting over this hump." That we always meant him and his wife Tasha, a woman with sharp eyes and a colder smile. They had big plans, talked about opening a barbershop, maybe buying property, but every dollar I lent disappeared like dust in the wind. One evening Marcus came by in person. He stood at the door, dressed in sneakers that cost more than my first car, tapping his foot like he was the one waiting on me. Evelyn set out sweet tea, the same kind her mama used to make for church gatherings, but the tension in that room could have split the table. "Pop," he said, leaning forward, "I've been thinking it's time you pass things down. You've worked all your life. Ain't no sense in holding on to all that when you could help your family now." I looked at him for a long moment. He didn't sound like my son. He sounded like a man who'd already decided what was his. "You talking about your inheritance?" I asked quietly. He smiled, all charm and arrogance. "Call it whatever you want. You're sitting on savings retirement, 2 houses. Why wait till you're gone? You could make things easier while you're still here to see it." Evelyn tried to calm him, but I could feel my pulse in my temples. "Son," I said, "I worked 40 years at that plant. I paid for your school, your first car, even bailed you out when that business went under. What I have left isn't just money, it's what's keeping this roof over our heads." Tasha crossed her arms. "We're not asking for charity, Mr. Walker," she said, her voice smooth but venomous. "We're asking for partnership. You wouldn't let your family struggle if you really cared." Her words cut deep, sharper than I expected. "Partnership," I repeated. "You talking to me like I'm some investor you're pitching to." Marcus's smile faded. "You're missing the point, Pop. You always do. You hold on to things like, that's going to keep you safe, but time don't wait for nobody. I'm your son. This should come to me." I stood up slow, pushing the chair back. "You think the Bible says honor thy father so you can get an early payday? That commandment wasn't written in fine print." His face twisted, anger bubbling under his skin. "You always got to bring the church into it," he snapped. "You think faith pays bills? You think those hymns gonna save anybody when the lights get cut off?" Evelyn gasped, whispering his name, but he was gone, lost in his own bitterness. I stared at the man in front of me and saw nothing of the boy I'd raised. The one who used to stand beside me in the choir, who used to reach for my hand during the benediction. Now his voice carried no faith, no warmth, just entitlement. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and said the words that burned through my chest like fire. "You're just scared to let go, Pop. Scared I might do better than you ever did." The door slammed, and the sound echoed through the house long after his car pulled away. Evelyn sat there, hands trembling over her tea glass. "He didn't mean it," she whispered, but I knew he did. For weeks, the silence between us and Marcus grew heavy. I'd pass by the church, wave to old friends, pretend nothing was wrong, but every sermon about family stung like a slap. The preacher talked about forgiveness, about letting go of pride. But what do you do when the wound comes from your own blood? Then came the phone call. Tasha again this time with a tone that could freeze a summer day. "We're done asking politely," she said. "Marcus deserves what's his. You're holding us back. You think you're teaching him lessons, but you're just bitter." I hung up before she could finish, but her words crawled under my skin. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house touching old photos on the wall, Marcus as a toddler in his Sunday best, his high school graduation, his wedding day. Every smile felt like a lie now. I'd given him everything a father could give: time, discipline, love, faith. And still it wasn't enough. Evelyn tried to pray it away. "The Lord will fix what's broken," she said softly, kneeling beside the bed. But I felt something shift inside me. Maybe the Lord could forgive, but I was still human. I was tired of being treated like a wallet with a heartbeat. A week later, Marcus came back. Not with flowers, not with an apology, just more demands. He walked through my door like he owned it, trailed by Tasha, her perfume thick and artificial. "Pop," he said, "let's be real. You're getting older. You can't manage all this by yourself. Let me take over the house in Atlanta and you and Mom can move in with us. We'll handle everything." Evelyn smiled weakly, trying to believe he meant well. But I saw through it. This wasn't kindness. It was strategy. "You mean take the deed out of my name?" I asked. He shrugged. "We can do it clean. You'll still be part of it." That was the moment I knew my son was gone. Not dead, but gone. His soul was chasing something I couldn't reach. I stood tall, feeling every year in my back, but every ounce of strength in my chest. "You want my name, my house, my hard work? Then you're going to have to bury me first." Tasha gasped. "That's not what he meant." I raised my hand. "Don't." My voice came out low, steady, final. "You both need to leave. Right now." Marcus looked at me like he couldn't believe I'd dare talk to him that way. "You'll regret this," he said. Maybe I would. But not today. When the door shut this time, it didn't echo like before. It sounded clean sharp, like the end of something that had needed ending for a long time. Evelyn cried quietly, her small frame shaking in the dim kitchen light. I held her close and whispered, "He's our son, but he's not our burden anymore." That night the wind howled outside, carrying the smell of rain and dust through the old window panes. I sat alone in my study, the same gospel record turning on the player. The room felt colder, emptier, but my mind was clear for the first time in months. I thought about every Sunday sermon I'd ever heard about faith being tested not in war or sickness, but in the quiet battles inside your own home. And I realized something I should have known long ago. Sometimes love means closing the door to protect what's left of your soul. The next morning, I wrote one last check, not to Marcus, but to the church fund for struggling fathers. I signed it with a steady hand, folded it into the envelope, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. And then, 3 days later, a knock came at the door, soft, slow, deliberate. I opened it, and what I saw waiting there changed everything I thought I knew about forgiveness. The rain started that night slow at first, like God was tapping gently on the windows to remind me I was still alive. The house smelled like old pine cleaner and rain-soaked air, the kind that creeps into the bones of an old man who's seen too much. Evelyn had gone to bed early, her Bible still open on her lap glasses, crooked from crying. I sat alone in the living room, the clock ticking louder than it should have, and reached for the photo album tucked under the couch. It was heavier than I remembered. Dust rose like smoke when I opened it. The first photo was from the summer of 1998. My boy Marcus was 6 years old, standing in our backyard with a grin so wide it could split the sun. He had mustard on his cheek from a hot dog, his hands sticky from lemonade, and a toy football tucked under his arm, like he already knew how to run the world. That was the first time he told me he wanted to be just like you, Pop. Back then, that meant something. I flipped the page. There we were at a Sunday cookout, surrounded by cousins and neighbors, The kind of gathering that smelled like ribs corn on the cob and old Motown on a cheap speaker. My brother Darnell was manning the grill wearing that silly Kiss the Cook apron. My wife was laughing with the church ladies, their voices blending with the hum of gospel in the distance. Marcus was chasing lightning bugs, barefoot fearless. I remember that night clearer than I remember yesterday. He tripped once, scraped his knee, and came running to me with tears big as pearls. I wiped them away with my thumb, kissed his forehead, and told him, "You fall, you get up. That's all a man can do." And now that same boy had turned into a stranger knocking on my door for money. I could still feel his small hand gripping mine from that night, but when I looked down at my own hand it trembled. Old veins, rough skin, years of work carved into it. I had built houses with these hands, laid bricks for strangers so my son could have shoes that didn't come from the clearance rack. I'd stayed up late balancing bills, fixing leaky roofs, saying yes to extra shifts while my knees ached and my back screamed. Also, he'd never have to know what it felt like to come home with hands that hurt. The weight of it hit me like a punch. Every lesson, every sacrifice, every quiet prayer, it all felt like it had gone somewhere I couldn't reach, somewhere lost between ambition and greed. Maybe I had failed him. Maybe I had built him too soft, given him too much. I remembered when he got his first job at the auto shop. He called me that night, proud voice full of sweat and purpose. "Pop, I'm making real money now." I laughed and told him, "Good, now you can take your old man out for dinner." He did too. Drove me to a little soul food spot near Jefferson Avenue, bought me catfish and cornbread. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I got you now. What happened to that boy?" The rain grew heavier, slapping against the windows like it was trying to wash away the years. I turned another page. His high school graduation. That day the sun was bright, cruelly so. He wore a blue gown and a cap tilted sideways, just enough to make his mama scold him. I stood there holding the camera, pretending not to cry. When he walked across that stage, I saw every hour I'd ever spent working overtime. Every sore muscle, every missed meal. It had all been worth it. I thought I was watching a man being born, but maybe I was watching him drift away. Evelyn stirred upstairs, calling my name faintly. I didn't answer. My heart was too full, too heavy to move. I stared at the picture again, that proud boy with a diploma in his hand and sunlight on his face. How do you go from that to betrayal? I poured myself a glass of bourbon, just one finger neat, and let it burn its way down. My daddy used to say, "Whiskey tells the truth," and Lord, it did. The truth was ugly tonight. I had given everything to my family, time, sweat, patience, and in return I was treated like an obstacle, like a man in the way of his own legacy. The clock struck midnight. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing over the wet road. I imagined Marcus driving in the rain somewhere, laughing with Tasha, maybe counting how much he thought I owed him. I wanted to believe he still felt guilt, that somewhere under that pride was the boy who used to sing off-key in the church choir, the one who used to fall asleep in my lap after Sunday service. But faith doesn't mean blindness, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I closed the album and looked around the room. Every piece of furniture told a story. The old armchair with the torn cushion I'd bought it the year he was born. The lamp by the window, I fixed its wiring after the storm of '09. The rug, the bookshelves, the framed Bible verse above the mantel. All reminders that I had built this home with love, brick by brick, prayer by prayer. And now the silence in it felt like betrayal itself. I thought about calling the pastor. Maybe confession would lighten the weight sitting in my chest. But what would I say? That I raised a son who turned his back on his father. That love wasn't enough to keep him from losing his way. I'd heard enough testimonies in my time to know how folks twist their pain into sermons. But this was private. Sacred. I walked to the back door and stepped out into the rain. The smell of wet earth filled the air, thick and sweet. The porch light flickered, buzzing faintly. Across the yard, the swing Marcus built for me on my 60th birthday swayed in the wind. I remembered that day. He showed up with a truckload of wood, grinning from ear to ear. "You always wanted one of these, Pop," he'd said. We spent the whole afternoon building it, laughing, cursing at the nails that wouldn't go straight. He handed me the first cup of sweet tea when we were done, raised his glass, and said, "To fathers who never stop giving." Now that swing creaked in the dark like a ghost whispering its regrets. I walked closer, reached out, and ran my hand along the wet wood. The rain washed down my arm, and I couldn't tell if it was water or tears on my face. I sat down the old wood moaning beneath me, and for the first time in years I let myself cry. Not the kind of cry that asks for sympathy, but the kind that comes when you realize some wounds don't heal. I thought about every time I said yes when I should have said no. Every time I saved him from his own mistakes, thinking love would be enough to teach him. I had mistaken mercy for weakness. My father never gave me that kind of softness. And maybe I overcorrected. Maybe I thought I could love my son into wisdom. The storm raged harder, wind howling through the trees like a choir of ghosts. Evelyn's voice called again from the house, but I couldn't move. I felt the cold sink into my skin, into my bones, into the spaces where faith used to live. When the thunder finally rolled off into the distance, I whispered into the dark, "Lord, I did my best." The porch light steadied, the rain slowed, and for a moment the world felt still. I looked toward the horizon where dawn would come soon enough, and I knew this peace wouldn't last. Something was coming. I could feel it in the air, thick and electric. 3 days ago my son had demanded my inheritance. Tonight I was about to learn what he'd do when I refused. The next morning came without sound, without purpose. The rain had passed, but it left the air heavy like the world was still holding its breath. For 6 long days after that fight, the house turned hollow. I'd wake up before sunrise out of habit, make 2 cups of coffee and pour one down the sink, because Evelyn never drank hers until it went cold. The kitchen, once filled with the smell of fried bacon and laughter, now felt like a museum of what used to be. Even the floor creaked quieter, like it knew not to disturb the silence that lived here now. The phone stayed on the counter, face up, waiting. Each vibration from the church group chat made my pulse skip. I'd pick it up too fast, praying for Marcus's name to light up the screen. It never did. He didn't call. He didn't text. The world just kept moving without him, and somehow that hurt worse than the argument itself. On the 3rd day, I drove into town just to be around people. The barber shop on the corner still had the same chattermen arguing about sports, laughing loud enough to shake the glass door. Normally I'd join them, maybe tell a story from back in my steel plant days, but not this time. I sat in the corner chair pretending to read an old magazine, watching the world spin on without noticing me. "Mr. Walker, you all right?" one of the barbers asked. His name was Reggie, a good man who knew when not to push. "Just needed a cut," I said, though my hair didn't need one. He didn't press it, just nodded and turned the chair. Gospel played softly from a speaker near the register, something old and slow. Mahalia Jackson, I think. I felt my throat tighten. When I got home, the silence hit harder. Evelyn was out at Bible study, and the house seemed to breathe differently without her. I turned on the same gospel station I'd heard earlier, just to have another human voice in the room. By the 5th night, the loneliness had weight. It sat in my chest like a stone, pressing down every time I thought about calling Marcus first. Pride held me back. Not the kind that shouts, but the quiet kind that whispers, "You've already given too much." Still, the ache of a father never stops asking, what if? What if I'd said it softer? What if I'd let him win the argument just once? But deep down I knew no softness could fix what greed had broken. Evelyn tried to keep busy, moving from room to room like a ghost in a prayer shawl. She hummed hymns under her breath, her way of holding the house together when I couldn't. At night I'd find her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of us from our younger days, back when our biggest worry was making rent, not losing our only child to ambition. We didn't talk much that week, not because we were angry with each other, but because every word felt too heavy to lift. Every time she looked at me, I could see the question in her eyes. Will he come back? I didn't have an answer. The days dragged on. I swept the porch, fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door, even polished my old tools just to keep my hands from shaking. Anything to avoid the silence. On the 6th day, I sat outside as the sun set behind the church steeple across the street. The choir was rehearsing, voices rising in harmony, the sound carrying through the humid air. That kind of singing gets into your bones. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, remembering the Sundays when Marcus used to stand beside me pretending to know the words, grinning when he hit the wrong note. I'd give anything to hear that sound again. Then came the unease. It started small, just a feeling that something wasn't right. The kind of instinct you can't explain, but can't ignore either. Evelyn noticed it too. One night she paused by the window curtains half open and said quietly, "You ever get the feeling someone's watching?" I brushed it off, but later that night I heard a soft crunch of gravel from the driveway. I turned off the lamp and peered through the blinds. Nothing but the dark outline of the old oak tree swaying in the wind. Still, I locked every door before bed. The next morning I found footprints in the damp soil by the gate, too large to be Evelyn's, too fresh to be old. I followed them halfway down the yard before they disappeared into the grass. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was him. That day I sat on the porch for hours waiting for a car that never came. The afternoon heat pressed down, hard cicadas screaming from the trees. My shirt stuck to my back, but I didn't move. I watched the street, every sound pulling at my nerves. Evelyn brought me a glass of iced tea, her hand brushing mine. "He'll come around," she said softly. I nodded, but the words didn't feel true anymore. Hope had started to feel like a bad habit I couldn't quit. That night, as we ate in silence, I caught her glancing toward the window again. The air felt off, too still, too heavy. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once, then stopped. I pushed my plate away. "You hear that?" She shook her head. "You're just tired." Maybe I was. But something deep in my gut told me this quiet wasn't peace. It was the pause before something broke. When I went to bed, I left the porch light on, same as always. But I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching that light flicker over the front yard. Somewhere a car door shut. Then an engine started, slow, deliberate, fading into the distance. I waited until the sound was gone, until only the hum of the refrigerator filled the house. Evelyn stirred beside me, half asleep. "Come back to bed," she whispered. "In a minute," I said, but I didn't move. The night stretched on long and quiet, and I realized this silence wasn't just loneliness, it was warning. Something was shifting. I could feel it in the walls, in the air, in the way the old clock ticked slower than before. When dawn broke, I stood by the door, staring at the road beyond the mailbox, and I knew one thing for sure. The next time I heard my son's name, it wouldn't be from his voice. It would be from something far darker heading my way. By the 7th morning, the air outside had that strange stillness right before a storm, even though the sky was bright. I was sitting at the kitchen table, half listening to the gospel station hum through the static, when I heard the sound tires on gravel, slow and deliberate. A delivery truck eased up to the curb. The driver, a young man in a brown uniform, jumped out and headed toward the porch carrying a box about the size of a shoebox. No return label, no name I recognized. Just my address printed neatly across the top. He set it down, gave a polite nod through the window, and drove off without a word. Something about that silence gnawed at me. Usually delivery men wave, crack a joke, maybe mention the weather. Not this one. He didn't even glance back, just drove off, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the air like smoke. Evelyn came in from the laundry room, wiping her hands on her apron. "You order something?" I shook my head. "Did you?" She frowned. "I don't buy nothing. We don't need, you know that." We both stared at the box through the screen door. It sat there like it was waiting for us, the morning sun catching the edge of its tape. Something about it felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Evelyn took a step closer, but her hand froze on the doorknob. "Baby," she whispered, voice trembling, "pray first before you touch that." I almost laughed, but her tone stopped me. She wasn't being superstitious. She was being careful. After everything that had happened with Marcus, I'd learned to trust her instincts. I took a breath, lowered my head, and muttered a short prayer. Lord, keep this house safe from whatever means us harm. Then I opened the door. The sound of the hinges creaked louder than it should have. I stepped out, each step heavier than the last, the wood groaning under my weight. The box sat dead center on the porch like it had been placed there with intention. I bent down and reached for it, but stopped. There was movement. Not loud, not sharp. Just a faint scrape inside, soft and rhythmic, like something shifting against cardboard. My stomach tightened. "Evelyn," I called quietly. "Get back inside." She didn't argue. The screen door clicked shut behind me. I knelt, listening. The noise came again, faint, scratching, then stillness. I glanced toward the street, but the truck was gone, the block empty. The only sound left was the buzz of cicadas and the dull hum of my heartbeat. I reached for the box again, slower this time. It was light, too light for something that size. I tilted it slightly. Whatever was inside slid with a whisper, brushing the walls like it had weight, but not substance. I set it down. My palms were sweating. "This don't feel right," I muttered. From behind the screen, Evelyn's voice came small and tight. "Maybe it's from Marcus. Maybe he's trying to make peace." I wanted to believe that, but something deep in my chest said no. My son might have turned cold, but he wasn't reckless enough to send something without a word. Not after what we'd been through. I went inside, grabbed a box cutter from the kitchen drawer, and came back out. The sky had darkened slightly, clouds gathering where there hadn't been any before. The air felt thick, almost metallic. I pressed the blade under the tape. The sound of the seal tearing was louder than it should have been. I peeled back the first flap and froze. Inside wasn't packing paper or a note or anything that made sense. It was fabric, dark and crumpled like an old cloth sack. It moved. I jumped back, knocking the box onto its side. Something alive rolled out with a dull thud. Evelyn screamed. It was a snake. A long, thick-bodied snake, coiled and breathing slow, its skin glinting dark green in the light. The thing lifted its head tongue, flicking eyes locking straight on me. For a second I couldn't move. My mind went blank. The only sound was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then instinct took over. I grabbed the porch broom and swung hard, knocking the box aside. The snake hissed, sliding toward the edge of the steps. Evelyn was praying now, voice cracking. "Lord Jesus, protect this house!" I swung again, catching it across the middle. It hit the wood with a dull slap and slithered into the yard, disappearing into the tall grass. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The wind had stopped. The world felt suspended. Evelyn was crying, clutching her cross necklace like it was the only thing keeping her standing. "That ain't no accident," she whispered. "That's evil." I didn't disagree. I knelt and looked inside the box again. Under the cloth was a folded piece of paper damp with sweat and dirt. I pulled it out carefully, hands shaking. The handwriting was messy, jagged. It said one line, "Forgive me." No name, no address, no clue. Just those two words. My mind spun. Forgive me. It couldn't be Marcus. He wouldn't use a snake to say sorry. Unless it wasn't meant for forgiveness at all. Unless it was meant as a warning. I turned the box over again. On the bottom, faint smudges of mud boot prints. Maybe size 12, same kind Marcus used to wear. My stomach turned. Evelyn sat down hard on the steps. "You think he—" "I don't know." I cut her off too sharp. "I just don't know." We sat there until the afternoon sun broke through again. The yard silent except for the buzz of flies near the open box. My mind ran in circles. If Marcus sent it, why now? Why after weeks of nothing? And if he didn't, who the hell did? That night I called the police. The officer on the phone sounded tired, skeptical. "Sir, it's probably some kind of prank," he said. "Teenagers do that kind of thing." "Teenagers don't write notes like this," I told him. "And they sure don't send snakes to old men they've never met." He promised to send someone by in the morning. I hung up and locked every door in the house, checked the windows twice. Evelyn refused to sleep in our room that night. She curled up on the couch with the Bible pressed against her chest. I sat by the window again, the same chair as before, watching the porch under the weak light. Every shadow looked alive. Every creak of the floor sounded like footsteps. Somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, and I couldn't tell if it was weather or warning. I kept thinking about that note. "Forgive me." The words looped in my head over and over until I couldn't tell if they were meant for me or from me. And then just past midnight I saw it. A car idling at the end of the street, headlights off, engine humming low. It didn't move for a long time, just sat there, watching. When it finally rolled away, my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even reach for the light switch. The fear that night wasn't just about the box anymore. It was about something else. Something that had already crossed my threshold and wasn't planning to leave. By morning, the air was already thick with heat, the kind that stuck to your skin before the sun even cleared the treetops. The police arrived just after 7, 2 patrol cars, and an animal control van that kicked up dust in the driveway. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them walk up like it was any other call. But it wasn't. Not for me. Not for this house. The officer in front was young, couldn't have been more than 30. He introduced himself, voice polite, but detached, the kind of tone people use when they think they already know what happened. "Mr. Walker, we got your report about the package." Behind him, a man from Animal Control carried a long metal pole with a loop at the end, his other hand gripping a heavy plastic container. He nodded once, silent, professional. I led them to the porch, the box still sitting where I'd left it, dark stains spreading across the wood from last night's rain. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window, her fingers pressed together in silent prayer. The officer crouched down, pulling on gloves. "You said it was a snake." I nodded. "Alive. Came out of that box. Nearly bit me." He looked at me like maybe I was exaggerating, then gestured for the animal control man to take a look. The guy moved with practiced calm, using the pole to nudge the box open. The smell hit first damp cardboard and rot. Then came the sound, a faint hiss from deep inside. "There it is," the man muttered. He lowered the pole, slowly looped, tightening around something dark that shifted and uncoiled. When it slid out, the sunlight hit its scales, black with a sheen of green long as my arm. The snake twisted, striking at the air before the man locked it down, muscles straining. "Cottonmouth," he said, breathing heavy. "You're lucky, sir. One bite from this, you wouldn't have made it to the phone." Evelyn gasped from inside, covering her mouth. I stared at the thing writhing in his grip, its eyes cold, unblinking, as if it had a purpose. The officer stepped back, shaking his head. "That's not a prank," he said. "That's a message." A message. The words sank into me like nails. I looked down at the box again. The shipping label had smeared overnight, but the numbers were still visible, partial zip code, no return address. It was enough to make my skin crawl. The officer picked it up with gloved hands, studying it. "You don't recognize the handwriting?" I didn't answer right away. My throat was dry, my thoughts spinning. Then I saw it, something I hadn't noticed before. A faint logo on the side of the box near the bottom corner. Viper's Den Exotics. My stomach dropped. It hit me like lightning. 3 months ago, I'd noticed a strange charge on my credit card statement. Marcus had borrowed the card to buy supplies for his project, he said. I'd asked what kind of project needed $400 at a reptile shop. He laughed it off, said it was a mistake. I let it go. I shouldn't have. My hands started to shake, not from fear, but from the slow burning understanding of what this meant. This wasn't random. This wasn't some stranger. My son had done this. The officer's voice blurred in the background, asking questions I couldn't answer. I just stood there, staring at the empty box, seeing every detail of Marcus's face the last time we spoke, The sneer, the anger in his eyes, the way he said I'd regret pushing him away. I thought it was just talk. I thought he'd calm down. But this was something darker. Evelyn came out onto the porch, her robe pulled tight around her. Did they find out who sent it? I couldn't look at her. Not yet, I said. My voice came out low cold. The animal control man sealed the snake into a container, snapping the lid shut. The sound made Evelyn flinch. We'll take it to the shelter, he said. They'll test it, confirm species, run the shipping info if possible. The officer looked at me again. You sure you don't have any enemies, Mr. Walker? Anyone with a grudge? I almost laughed. Only family. He frowned, not sure if I was joking. I wasn't. After they left, the porch looked empty but wrong, like the house itself had seen too much. Evelyn tried to sweep away the dirt and water, but I stopped her. Leave it, I said. It's a reminder. Inside, I poured a glass of water, but it sat untouched on the table. I could hear Evelyn in the next room whispering prayers under her breath. I wished I could join her, but the words wouldn't come. My faith had always been strong-rooted in decades of Sunday sermons and hard lessons, but now it felt hollow. What scripture covers this? What verse do you quote when your own child sends death to your doorstep? I went to my study, opened the old filing cabinet, and pulled out the folder with Marcus's name on it, the one I'd started keeping when things first went wrong. Bank statements, credit reports, the credit card charge from Viper's Den printed in black and white. $396.72. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. The rage didn't come all at once. It crept in slow like cold air through a cracked window. At first, I wanted to believe there was some explanation. Maybe someone stole his identity. Maybe it was coincidence. But deep down, I knew. There was no one else who knew my address, my habits, my faith. No one else who'd want to scare me more than hurt me. I thought of all the nights I'd bailed him out, all the times I'd said yes, when the answer should have been no. I thought about that little boy from the cookout running barefoot through the grass. How does that boy grow into a man who sends his father a snake? Evelyn came into the room, her eyes red. Richard, she said softly. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe someone's trying to make it look that way. I looked up at her, the folder still open on my lap. Baby, I said, voice cracking. He's the only one who could have known how. Her lips trembled. She sank into the chair across from me, covering her face. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock counting down to something I couldn't name. As the day went on, the heat rose, pressing against the windows. The smell of the snake still lingered, sour and earthy. I opened every window, but it wouldn't leave. It clung to the curtains, to the walls, to the back of my throat. That evening I went outside again. The street was empty. No cars, no kids, just the whisper of wind through the trees. The same spot where the box had sat looked clean now, but I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel the weight of what had been inside. I sat on the porch steps, the boards still warm under my feet, and thought about what came next. The police would file a report, maybe trace the shipment. But I already knew what they'd find. They'd find a name I didn't want to hear. Evelyn called from the door, her voice soft, pleading. Come inside, baby. It's getting late. I didn't move. I just watched the horizon fade from gold to gray, the shadows stretching long across the yard. When I finally stood up, I looked at the empty road and whispered to no one. If he wants to send fear, he's about to learn what fear really looks like. And as the night crept in, I knew the next move wouldn't come from him. It would come from me. I waited until the house was dark and quiet before I made the call. The night pressed against the windows, the air outside still heavy from the storm earlier. Evelyn was asleep in the living room, Bible open on her chest, her breathing shallow but peaceful. I didn't want her to hear what was coming. I didn't want anyone to. I sat at my desk, the glow of the lamp turning everything gold except my hands. They looked older tonight, like they'd aged 10 years since that box arrived. My thumb hovered over Marcus's number for a long time before I finally hit dial. The phone rang 3 times before his voice came through casual, too casual. Pop. You calling this late for a reason I didn't answer right away. I could hear voices in the background, laughter music, maybe a television. Life going on. His life. The sound made my stomach twist. You sent me a box? I said, my voice low, steady. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A real one, the kind that comes from arrogance. A box. What? Like a gift? My jaw tightened. Don't play dumb with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a pause. Then that same damn laugh again, sharp and careless. Oh, that? You're seriously calling me about that, Pop? It was just a joke. You act like it was a bomb or something. My heart thudded once hard. A joke? Yeah, he said. Come on. You used to have a sense of humor. You get so uptight lately, man. I thought it'd lighten you up. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a second I couldn't speak. I stared at the wall, at the photo of him as a boy hanging next to the window, the one where he was missing his front teeth, grinning wide, holding a football bigger than his head. I remembered the smell of grass that day, the sound of him laughing when I chased him around the yard. That memory cracked under the sound of his grown-up laughter now. You call sending a venomous snake to your father's house a joke? I said quietly. He snorted. It wasn't venomous. I made sure of that. The guy at the store said it was harmless. My blood went cold. The guy at the store. Yeah, he said, catching himself too late. I closed my eyes. The silence stretched thin between us. I could hear his breathing now, fast and defensive. Marcus, I said, calm but deadly. You bought that thing with my credit card. He didn't deny it. Didn't even sound sorry. You're the one who gave me access, remember? Said it was for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency, I said, my voice rising. This was hate. He chuckled again, but there was a tremor in it this time. Man, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I just wanted to get your attention. Maybe make you think twice about cutting me off. It's not like I meant for anything bad to happen. Not like you meant to kill me, I said, or just scare me into giving you what you wanted. That shut him up. The silence was different now, heavy, dark, alive. I could almost hear him trying to come up with an excuse, something to smooth it over like he always did when he got caught lying as a kid. But I wasn't that forgiving father anymore. That man had died somewhere between the hiss of that snake and the word prank. When he finally spoke, his tone was cold flat. You always take things too serious. You've been treating me like a stranger since Mom passed. Maybe if you didn't push everyone away, you'd still have a family to talk to. I laughed, then a low, hollow sound that surprised even me. You're right about one thing. I am pushing something away tonight. He didn't get it, not yet. What's that supposed to mean? It means this was the last time you'll ever hear my voice, I said. Come on, Pop. You don't mean that. I do. My hand shook, but my voice didn't. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You sent death into my home. You made your mother cry herself to sleep. And for what money control? You can have all the pride you want, son, but not another damn cent from me. He scoffed. You think I need your money? I got my own. Then use it, I said. Because the next time I see you near this house, I'll call the law myself. And I won't tell them it was a joke. There was another pause, then a click. The sound of him hanging up. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, the quiet ringing in my ears. Evelyn's soft snoring drifted from the other room. I looked down at my reflection in the window glass. My eyes were different, harder, clearer. Something inside me had gone still. I got up, went to the cabinet and poured a drink, just one. The bourbon burned going down, but it steadied me. I thought about what anger does to a man, how it twists love into something sharp, something you can't hold without bleeding. But I wasn't bleeding anymore, not for him. I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. Each click echoed like a decision being made. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen. I stopped at the front door, the same door that Snake had crossed through, the same door I'd opened for my son too many times. I locked it, deadbolt, chain. Then I slid the old wooden bar into place across the frame. That was my answer. When I went back to the bedroom, Evelyn stirred. "Was it him?" she whispered. "It was," I said. "What did he say?" I hesitated. "He said it was just a prank." Her eyes opened slowly, tears glinting in the dark. "Oh, Lord." I sat beside her, took her hand. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "He won't call again." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, a low growl from somewhere beyond the trees. I could feel the storm building again, but this one wasn't weather. It was something else, something I'd been holding back for far too long. When I finally lay down, the house seemed to breathe with me. The anger didn't burn anymore. It settled deep like embers waiting for wind. And as the night faded toward dawn, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The morning light came in thin and cold, sliding across the living room floor like a blade. I hadn't slept at all. The echoes of Marcus's laugh still clung to the walls, and every time I blinked, I saw his smirk behind my eyelids. That sound, that mocking ease in his voice had burned away something in me that night. Love, maybe, or patience. Whatever it was gone for good. Evelyn was still asleep on the couch, her Bible closed now, her hand resting on the cross around her neck. She looked small, fragile, like she'd carried too much of my burden for too long. I covered her with a blanket and went down the hall to my study. The door creaked open and the familiar smell of old paper and coffee grounds met me. The clock ticked steady, unbothered, as if it didn't care that the world had tilted. I sat down at my desk, turned on the lamp, and stared at the stack of papers in front of me. Bank statements, legal forms, insurance policies, the lifeblood of a lifetime's work. I'd spent decades building this life brick by brick, dollar by dollar, and I'd let that boy, my own blood, treat it like an open faucet. Every time he cried help, I'd turn the handle. Every time he failed, I paid the bill. Not anymore. A gospel hymn played softly from the radio in the corner. Mahalia Jackson's voice rose slow and sure, the kind of voice that sounds like it's singing straight to your soul. "Precious Lord, take my hand." I exhaled the tension, leaving me in pieces. My hand trembled as I reached for the checkbook. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked in the corner of the screen, waiting. My bank account looked back at me like a confession. Years of automatic transfers to Marcus's accounts. Monthly allowances. He didn't earn loan payments. He'd promised to repay credit lines I'd co-signed because I couldn't stand seeing my child sink. All of it draining me slow. I clicked the first one. Cancel. Then the next. Cancel. And the next. Each click was a release. A quiet liberation that didn't come with shouting or fireworks, just the soft click of control returning to my hands. I paused halfway through, rubbing my temples. The sunlight had climbed higher now, catching the dust motes floating in the air. The house was still. For once it didn't feel haunted. It felt awake. I reached for the drawer under the desk and pulled out an old folder labeled Estate. It had been sitting there for years, untouched, waiting for someday. I flipped it open. My will, my assets, the instructions for everything I'd built and everything I'd leave behind. I read it line by line, then took out a pen. My name was still listed as primary beneficiary for Evelyn, of course, but beneath that, Marcus. That name looked wrong now, like a stain that had spread too far. I drew a line through it. The sound of the pen scraping the paper was sharp, final. Then I wrote a new name beneath it. Walker Family Foundation. A fund I'd never gotten around to starting, one meant for scholarships in the church community, kids who'd lost their fathers or mothers to hard luck, but still tried. Kids who understood the value of struggle. My voice cracked when I spoke out loud. "This isn't revenge," I whispered, barely recognizing the sound of myself. "It's redemption." For the first time in months, the ache in my chest loosened. It didn't vanish, it just softened, like a scar finally healing over. The gospel song ended and another began slow and mournful. I let it play while I sorted through old receipts and letters. There was one from Marcus crumpled written years ago when he was 20. Pop, I'm sorry for the fight. I love you. I remembered the night he'd left it on my pillow after sneaking out. I'd forgiven him before sunrise back then. I tore the letter in half, then in half again. Not out of hate, but out of necessity. You can't keep rebuilding the same bridge after it's burned too many times. Around noon, Evelyn woke up and came to the doorway, still in her robe. "You've been in here all morning," she said softly. I didn't look up. I had to finish something. She glanced at the papers spread out across the desk, the open folders, the laptop screen. Her eyes lingered on the will. "You're really doing it. I'm just making things right." She stepped closer. "And Marcus?" I met her gaze steady. He made his choice. Now I'm making mine. She didn't argue, just nodded slowly, tears threatening but refusing to fall. She knew this wasn't anger talking anymore. This was clarity. After she left, I leaned back in the chair and stared out the window. The afternoon light filtered through the branches of the old oak tree, flickering across the glass. I used to think peace was something you had to earn through forgiveness. But peace, I realize, sometimes comes from walking away before forgiveness becomes another wound. I picked up the phone again. This time it wasn't to call Marcus. I dialed the church office. Pastor Henry answered, his deep voice carrying the same calm he always had. "Morning, Richard. Everything all right? I need to talk to you about a donation," I said. "Something long-term. For the youth program." He was quiet for a moment, maybe sensing the weight behind my words. "You sure about that?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. He promised to stop by later that week, and I hung up. When I closed the laptop, the silence in the room felt different. Not empty, not lonely. Just right. I walked over to the record player, flipped the vinyl, and let the needle fall again. The song that came next was slower, warmer Sam Cooke. This time, a change is gonna come. I smiled. Out in the yard, the swing Marcus had built moved slightly in the breeze. I watched it from the window, sunlight bouncing off its chains. It no longer felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. It looked like a symbol of what I'd survived. I knew this peace wouldn't last forever. Maybe he'd come back angry. Maybe there'd be consequences I couldn't see yet. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I stood there until the last note faded, then turned off the radio and straightened the papers on the desk. Outside, the world was quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes after you've made a choice you can't undo. And as I walked toward the kitchen to pour Evelyn her morning coffee, I heard the faintest sound in the distance, a car pulling up slow in the driveway. The tires crunched over gravel. I didn't look out the window. Not yet. I just smiled faintly and whispered to myself, "Right on time." The sound of the car tires crunching on gravel grew louder, slow and deliberate, like a warning. I didn't have to look out the window to know who it was. I felt it in my bones before I heard the engine cut off. The air in the room shifted, heavy and electric. Evelyn peeked through the curtain, her voice trembling. "It's him. He brought her too." I nodded, once calm. I figured he would. The knock came hard and fast, rattling the doorframe. Not polite, not hesitant, angry. The kind of knock that demands something, not asks for it. I took my time walking through the hallway, each step echoing against the wood. The gospel record had stopped spinning, leaving the house silent except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. "Don't open that door," Evelyn whispered. "Please just let them cool off." I turned to her, my voice low but steady. "This house belongs to me. I won't hide in my own home." When I pulled the door open, the sunlight hit me full in the face. Marcus stood on the porch, jaw tight, eyes blazing. Tasha was beside him, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Behind them, their car idled in the driveway. Black sedan tinted windows, 2 car seats in the back. My grandbabies weren't there. That detail hit me harder than I expected. Marcus didn't waste a second. You think you can just cut me off like that, freeze us out like we're some strangers? I didn't answer, just looked at him, studied the man standing there with his fists clenched, chest puffed out like a threat. He looked like a stranger wearing my son's face. Tasha stepped forward, her voice sharp and venomous. We got bills, Richard. Kids to feed. You think that little stunt of yours doesn't hurt your grandsons too? You're punishing them just to make a point. I felt Evelyn's presence behind me, small but strong. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I took a slow breath, gripping the edge of the door frame. You came all this way to tell me that cutting off my own bloodline financially makes me the villain. Marcus's face twitched. You act like you're some holy man, but you're just bitter. You think because you worked hard, everyone else has to suffer. That's not love, Pop. That's control. I stepped onto the porch, closing the space between us. Control, I said quietly. Son, control is when you send poison to your father's house and call it a joke. Control is when you try to buy my forgiveness with guilt. Don't talk to me about love. You wouldn't recognize it if it sat beside you at the dinner table. He flinched just barely. I saw it. The truth stung even through all that arrogance. Tasha's eyes narrowed. You can't just turn your back on your own grandchildren. They deserve better than this cold-hearted act. I stared at her for a long moment before replying. You want to use my grandbabies as weapons? My voice dropped low, almost a growl. Then you best not bring them into a war you started. The air went still. Even the cicadas outside seemed to stop for a heartbeat. Marcus took a step closer, anger trembling through him. You think you're some kind of hero standing there with your pride and your Bible. But let's be real, Pop, you ain't got anyone left. Not friends, not family, not even me. I didn't move. You're right about one thing I said, I don't have you. And thank God for that. His nostrils flared. You really want to do this? I already did, I said. When I let you walk away the first time, I gave you the freedom to become your own man. But you turned that freedom into a weapon and pointed it back at me. I'm done being your target. He shook his head, pacing the porch. You've lost your mind. You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. I've been regretting things for 60 years, Marcus. I'm fresh out. He didn't expect that. His eyes flickered, something like fear or maybe disbelief crossing his face for the first time. Tasha tugged at his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. He brushed her off, stepping closer until he was right in front of me. I could smell the cologne on him, cheap and aggressive, like the kind men wear when they want to be noticed. Don't make me your enemy, he said. I looked him dead in the eye. Son, you already made that choice when you stopped being my son. Evelyn stepped beside me, then her small frame barely reaching my shoulder, but the strength in her voice made the ground feel solid again. Marcus, go home, she said. Take your wife and leave before you say something you can't take back. Tasha's tone turned sharp. He's just an old man talking big. You don't have to listen to this. Evelyn's eyes flashed. Maybe not. But the Lord's listening. You remember that. Marcus's jaw worked, as if he wanted to spit something cruel, but couldn't find the words. He stared at me one last time, searching for weakness, for guilt, for anything left to manipulate. There wasn't any. I opened the door wider, not to invite him in, but to make my meaning clear. You see this threshold, I said, pointing down. That line right there. It's where my peace begins and your poison ends. Cross it again, and I'll treat you like any other intruder. For a second, I thought he might test me. His fists clenched, his shoulders tense the way they used to when he was a teenager about to say something he couldn't take back. But then he saw it, the steadiness in my eyes, the quiet kind of fury that doesn't need to raise its voice. The kind a man earns after surviving too many storms. He stepped back. Tasha grabbed his hand and hissed, "Let's go." They turned and walked down the path toward the car. Gravel crunched under their shoes, every step sounding like the closing of a door I'd been afraid to shut for years. When they reached the car, Marcus stopped, looked over his shoulder. You'll regret this when those boys grow up and ask why their granddaddy wasn't around. I didn't blink. No, I said. You'll regret it when they ask why their father taught them to hate. He didn't reply. Just slammed the car door and drove off, dust rising behind them like smoke. The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't the kind that weighed you down anymore. It was clean, sacred, final. Evelyn reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but when I looked at her, she smiled through tears. You did what you had to, she whispered. I did what a man should have done a long time ago, I said. We stood there for a while, watching the road until the dust settled. Then I closed the door, locked it, and for the first time in years, the sound of that bolt sliding into place didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. The house exhaled with us, quiet but alive. Somewhere in the distance, the church bells began to ring slow and steady, cutting through the afternoon heat. I turned toward Evelyn, my voice steady, calm. He'll come around again, I said, but next time he won't find the man he used to know. And as I walked back toward my study, I realized that the war was finally over, not because I won, but because I no longer cared to fight. The following Saturday, the sun rose clean and gold over the neighborhood, the kind of light that seemed to forgive everything it touched. I woke before the alarm, before the birds, before Evelyn stirred beside me. The house was still. No shadows hanging in corners, no echo of anger, just a calm that felt earned. I lay there for a moment, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing, and realized I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring anymore. The storm had passed, and all that was left was the quiet after. By noon, the church parking lot was full. The smell of frying catfish drifted into the air, mixed with cornbread and laughter. Kids ran through the grass with sticky hands. Women from the choir fanned themselves under the oak tree, and the men argued over who seasoned their batter best. It was the annual fish fry, something I used to help organize every year before life started getting too heavy. I hadn't planned on going, but Evelyn insisted. You need to be around people who love you, she said, pressing my ironed shirt into my hands. And the Lord knows you could use some sunshine. She was right. She usually was. When we pulled up, heads turned not out of gossip, but out of warmth. Brother Walker. You made it this year, someone called from across the lot. Deacon Harris. His voice, as big as his belly, waved a spatula at me. We saved you a plate, old man. Don't let it get cold. I smiled, the kind that comes easy for the first time in a long time. You know I don't miss your catfish if I can help it. Evelyn laughed softly beside me as we made our way toward the picnic tables. The sun caught the silver in her hair, and I thought about how long she'd carried me through storms without ever asking for thanks. Folks stopped to greet her, squeezing her hands, asking about her garden, her pies, her health. She glowed among them, a quiet kind of grace that drew people in. We sat under the awning near the choir stand, 2 plates piled high in front of us. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I took the first bite. The crunch of the fish, the tang of lemon, the sweetness of hush puppies, it all felt like home again. Around us, people laughed, kids shouted, gospel music played low through the speakers. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. Evelyn nudged me, her smile teasing. You're quiet today. Just taking it in, I said. Feels good to breathe without anger in my lungs. She reached for my hand, gave it a squeeze. You did the right thing, Richard. The hard thing, but the right one. I nodded. Didn't feel right at first. Felt like losing. That's because goodbyes always do, she said. But sometimes the Lord don't fix what's broken. He just removes what keeps you from healing. I looked out across the churchyard. The pastor was saying grace before the next batch of food. His voice carried strong and steady through the speakers, blessing the meal, the families, the peace we often forget to ask for. I bowed my head out of habit, but this time my prayer was different. Shorter, simpler. Thank you for letting me learn when to let go. When I looked up again, I saw a group of kids running near the parking lot. One of them tripped and fell, skinning his knee. Before anyone else could move, I was already walking over, the instinct taking over before thought. I knelt, helped him up, brushed the dirt from his hands. His mother rushed over, thanking me, calling me sir, with that familiar kindness only small-town folks still use. The boy smiled through his tears, brave like little boys always are. I smiled back. You're all right, son. Just a scrape. Don't let it stop you from running. When I walked back to the table, Evelyn was watching me, her eyes soft. You still have it in you, she said. Have what the heart to care, even after everything. I looked at her, then out toward the children again, the sunlight glinting off the cars, the laughter floating through the air like a hymn. Maybe that's the lesson, I said. You can set boundaries without losing your heart. The Lord protects those who set boundaries in love. She smiled, eyes shining. You should tell that to the pastor. He'd make it a sermon. Let him. I'm done preaching, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm just living now. As the day went on, the shadows grew longer, stretching across the field. The choir started singing, no microphones this time, just voices rising together, strong and raw. His eye is on the sparrow. The same hymn that played at my mother's funeral, the same one I used to hum when I tucked Marcus into bed after long days. For a second, a flicker of sadness passed through me, but it didn't stay. I let it drift away with the breeze. After the song ended, the pastor came over, wiping his hands on a towel. Brother Walker, he said, smiling wide, good to see you back. We've been praying for you. I nodded. And I've been listening. He chuckled. You look lighter, like you finally laid something down. I did, I said. Something I should have set down a long time ago. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. That's how faith works, my friend. Sometimes you don't see the blessing until after you stop holding on to the pain. Evelyn and I stayed until the sun dipped low, turning the sky a soft orange. The laughter, the music, the smell of frying fish, it wrapped around me like a memory of simpler times. I realized this was what peace looked like. Not perfection, not forgetting, just learning how to sit still again without bitterness in your chest. When we finally stood to leave, Deacon Harris called after me, waving another plate. For the road, I laughed, shaking my head. You trying to make me fat again, Deacon? Just trying to keep you happy, he said. I took the plate anyway. Evelyn smiled, her arm looped through mine as we walked to the car. The night was cooling, fast cicadas starting their evening song. Somewhere down the road, the church bell chimed once, long and deep. As we pulled out of the lot, I glanced back in the rearview mirror. The cross on top of the church glowed faintly in the fading light. I thought of all the times I'd questioned my faith these past weeks, how I doubted not God, but myself. Now I understood the difference. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it just means releasing their hold over you. I reached across the seat, took Evelyn's hand. You know, I said quietly, I think I'm finally ready to go back to Sunday service. She looked at me with that familiar spark of pride. Then we'll be there front row. The road stretched ahead, lined with magnolia trees swaying gently in the wind. And as we drove toward home, the last light of day glinting off my windshield, I whispered one more prayer, not for Marcus, not for revenge, but for peace. And for the first time in a long while, I knew the Lord was listening. Sometimes peace doesn't come from forgiving others. It comes from forgiving yourself for holding on too long. This story reminds us that love without boundaries becomes pain, and mercy without wisdom becomes weakness. As we grow older, we learn that protecting our peace is not selfish. It's sacred. Setting limits with those who misuse our kindness doesn't mean we've stopped loving them. It means we've started loving ourselves enough to stop the hurt. Faith doesn't always show up as a miracle or a sign from heaven. Sometimes it's the quiet strength to close a door gently and walk away with grace. True redemption isn't about punishing those who wronged us. It's about reclaiming our dignity and finding calm where chaos once lived. If you've ever been taken for granted, remember you can still choose peace over resentment and love over control. Subscribe for more stories of wisdom, justice, and redemption, and share in the comments. How you learn to protect your peace. Your story might help someone else find theirs.